By the winter of 1945, Europe was a continent in ruins. The Second World War, which had begun more than 5 years earlier with the invasion of Poland, was now entering its final, merciless months. Adolf Hitler's Reich was collapsing under the weight of Allied advances. From the west, British and American forces pressed across the Rhine, whereas from the east, the Soviet Red Army drove forward with unstoppable momentum, pushing through Poland into the very heart of Germany. In those desperate weeks, Germany's cities bore the full weight of Allied air power. Each had already endured devastation from the sky, but there was one city many believed might be spared: Dresden. Dresden was no ordinary place. For centuries, it had been celebrated as the Florence on the Elbe. Its Baroque palaces, its cathedrals and opera houses, its galleries all gave it a reputation as one of Europe's cultural jewels. By 1945, however, tens of thousands of refugees fleeing the Red Army's advance crowded into the city's streets, schools and churches. Dresden's population swelled far beyond its means, as people clung to the hope art and beauty might shield them from war. That hope ended on the night of February 13th. Shortly after 10 p.m, the first air raid siren sounded. High above the city, a special unit of RAF pathfinders appeared. The de Havilland Mosquito interceptors released bright green and red flares, cascading down through the darkness. These flares lit the city's centre like a target, guiding the waves of the bombers that followed. Hundreds of British aircraft dropped high explosives to shatter roofs and walls, and moments later, incendiary bombs rained down into the ruins, igniting a firestorm. Within hours, entire neighbourhoods were aflame. The second wave arrived before midnight, magnifying the destruction. By morning, Dresden was a sea of fire, and as survivors searched for safety, American bombers returned in daylight, ensuring nothing remained untouched. Flames fed on themselves, growing into a storm of unimaginable fury. Winds howled through the streets, pulling oxygen into the inferno, strong enough to drag people from the ground. Stone cracked, iron melted, the air itself seemed to burn. Many who fled to cellars suffocated as fire consumed the oxygen around them. Others ran to the city's lakes and rivers, desperate to escape the heat. But even there was no safety. Some drowned in the crush of panicked bodies. Others perished as the water itself boiled in the firestorm's extreme heat. Estimates of the dead would vary: 25,000, 40,000, perhaps more. From the beginning, the Dresden raid stirred controversy. To some, it was a strategic blow, meant to cripple the German infrastructure. To others, it was a show of overwhelming force against the city's little military value. An act that blurred the line between victory and vengeance. What remains certain is this: in the span of 2 nights, the Florence on the Elbe's treasures turned to ash. But what was it like to be there? Here is a survivor's account.
My name is Anna. I was 23 years old in February 1945, living with my family in Dresden. People often ask what it was like on the night the bombs fell. Dresden was a beautiful city. We called it the Florence on the Elbe. Baroque buildings, music, the opera, the porcelain works. It felt untouchable. Even in the war years, we believed we were safer than most. Our city had little industry, only culture. There were refugees everywhere by that winter, tens of thousands who had fled from the east, from the advancing Red Army. They crowded into schools, churches, and basements. Dresden was swollen with people. That is something important to remember. The city was full when the bombs came. I remember the sound. A deep, growing roar that filled the air. Then the explosions, one after another, tearing the ground apart. The earth shook under our feet. We ran to the cellar, but our shelter was shallow. You could feel the heat pressing down even through the earth. When we came out after that first wave, the city center was already burning. Whole streets lit up like torches. The sky glowed red and sparks rained down. People were running everywhere, carrying bundles, carrying children, screaming for relatives they had lost in the dark. But the worst came later. Around midnight, the second wave struck. Hundreds of bombers, one after another. They dropped incendiaries, thousands of them. The fires joined together until they formed a storm. I had never seen anything like it. The wind was so strong it pulled people off their feet into the flames. The fire consumed the oxygen. People collapsed just trying to breathe. I held my mother's hand, but the smoke was thick, and I could barely see her face. We tried to flee to the Elbe, thinking the river would be safer. On the way, I saw things I cannot forget. Bodies already lying in the street, burned where they had fallen. Families pressed against walls, trying to shield themselves from the heat. Horses from the cavalry stables ran wild, their manes on fire. The heat was unbearable, like standing at the mouth of an oven. At one point, we had to crawl low to the ground to find air. The flames roared above us, and the pavement itself seemed to burn. People pushed and trampled each other in their panic. I lost my sister in that chaos, and I never saw her again. By dawn, the city was unrecognizable. Buildings were gutted shells. Streets were nothing but rubble and embers. The Frauenkirche, the great church, still stood then, blackened but standing, though later it too would collapse. Everywhere there were bodies. Some lay in neat rows where people had tried to escape to shelters, others in piles where the heat had sucked them together. Many could not even be identified. Those who had survived tried to find food, water, shelter, and each time more planes came. I survived because we managed to reach the outskirts, crawling through ruins, covering our mouths with rags. We drank from puddles. We ate whatever we could find. I had burns on my arms and face, but I lived. But perhaps, if you remember our words, our stories, then something of us will live on.